My name is Nancy Watt. I am the owner of a creative agency in Toronto, Canada, Ontario, Canada, and I deliver applied improvisation workshops and specialized facilitation and training and speaking using the tools and techniques of improv, but based on evidence-based research. Hi.
Oh, that sounds already perfect.
There you go.
So what kind of activities do you have? What kind of clients do you have?
My clients tend to be human beings, Lucas, and it is to my great delight and not surprise, but delight that the work I do spans all sectors. I'm very lucky to be working with some big technology companies in Silicon Valley. I love working with the public sector, the federal government in Canada. I do a lot of work in law schools and medical societies, teaching physicians to communicate better with patients, advocating in the courtroom, allowing lawyers to be able to assess their delivery of cases in a courtroom. And so healthcare, government, business, and tech keeps me very busy.
So that sounds a huge variety of clients, although you said you focus on humans.
I know.
So how do you use improvisation for such a broad field of clients and people?
Victor Borge once said, "The shortest distance between two people is laughter." Whether I have a workshop with Princeton physicists or individuals who are incarcerated or judges, everyone connects and people love to laugh. They love to connect and laugh. That in a way gives them meaning. And this spans all sectors. It is how humans relate and connect and learn. Applied improvisation is powerfully and uniquely well suited to be able to deliver that type of training. So whether I'm teaching surgeons to be able to speak effectively with patients or allow the addicted and to be able to express themselves in a different way, it is the same process of connection. The Yes and Foundation, the philosophy of how we connect, gives us that bridge. It is the conduit to connection.
That's very interesting, because I once heard from John Cleese from Monty Python that he said, how can you make people open up and open their minds? And he said, like, well, when they laugh, because they open up, not only their mind, but their mouth, the ears and eyes. And he said, like, this is his way how to open up. So this seems to be a similar idea that you just mentioned.
And there is neurological evidence to back that up. I love that you said that. I love that. And you referenced Monty Python. I just watched 4 Yorkshire Men. I don't know if anyone knows that, but it's a great sketch. Dr. Charles Lim out of Berkeley has done functional MRIs on individuals in a creative state, in an improvised state. And the part of the brain that lights up is the medial prefrontal cortex. What is suppressed is the lateral prefrontal cortex. The lateral prefrontal cortex is that part of the brain that is responsible for self-monitoring, that part in our brain, that voice in our brain that tells us, don't do that, don't screw up. It's the editor in our head. I call it the head editor. The head editor. The head editor can be a nasty little voice and follows us. But what connection and creativity and improv does when it lights up the medial prefrontal cortex is a different experience. The medial prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that is responsible for self-expression. Self-expression, closely aligned to feelings of freedom. So it is just a little bit ironic that we can elicit feelings of freedom while we do workshops with the incarcerated or those people who feel constrained in different ways.
So when do you think is it good to, switch on the editor and when to switch off? So because sometimes it's good perhaps to be open-minded, sometimes perhaps it's also good to have a rather closed mind, or to more have a convergent thinking to analyze things. And then there are situations which you rather open up, have this divergent thinking and ideas. So when do you think is what appropriate?
I love that question. The improv is not a thing, right? It's not something tangible. Improv is a way. It is a way of thinking. It is a way of creating. It is a way of connecting. And because it is a practice, we get this, we build and cultivate this intuitive knowledge that rarely sees the light of day. Building this intuition allows us to know when to pivot, when we can open up, when we need to have divergent or convergent thinking. I use silence as a powerful friend, because how we listen determines our relationships, our leadership style, the course of our organization. Listening and employing silence as a friend allows us to have that wonderful gift, that difference between a reaction and a response. The difference between a reaction and a response is huge, And allowing that pause, that wonderful gift of silence, allows us to be mindful, to stay with us, and to be able to respond in a much more powerful way. Love that, Kay. Thank you. Getting a little love in the chat. She's awesome.
Now, in our world, I think we could say that there's so much noise around us, so many signals, so many things we could listen to and we could respond to. And I think that the idea of silence is a good way to think of when to select on what and on what you want to respond. So how can you use silence to select what do you want to listen, and how can you listen to this relevant information for you?
When we listen to how we listen, a world opens up. And I don't mean to wax poetic and get really artsy on you, but in my workshop today, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the 5 different ways of listening and how we can give ourselves the gift of hearing how other people are hearing us. It is a powerful tool in negotiation. It helps leaders. It helps marriages. It really helps talking to teenagers, right? It helps when we talk to children. Quickly, the 5 different types of listening are distracted, the butt-in, the brain, the contrarian, and the counsel. When we know how others are listening, we are able to respond in kind. It is a superpower thing to have. It allows people to say about you, wow, Lucas is a really good listener, As we know from a lot of social science research, especially I'm doing a lot of work in diversity and inclusion. In order to feel included, people need to feel like they belong, to feel heard, to be seen. I remember sitting in grand rounds at our university hospital years ago, and a visiting professor in psychiatry said, "More than a need to be loved is a human being's need to belong." And indeed, even when we read about love, experience love, we hear things like people describe love using belonging words, We hear people say, she just gets me. She just gets me, or I can be myself with him. I can be myself with him, shedding all of who we are in our wonderful imperfect selves and bringing who we are to that. How powerful would that be if we could translate that into our organization and our leadership style to bring out the best in our people? I'm very lucky to have a mentor that teaches me a lot. And Ron likes to say, sometimes when you speak with a manager, we are left with the impression that he or she is very important. When we speak with a leader, we are left with the impression that we are important, that I am important. That because of the process of human reciprocity and yes and make your partner look good, this practice, this way of thinking, this way of leading allows us to get to be that type of leader, the inclusive leader, the servant leadership, the type of leadership that we need now more than ever. And we are about to come back to each other. You know, we see the end of the light with this global pandemic, and we are going to need refined and powerful leadership skills, and applied improv as a practice and a way of connecting with others will give us that.
Now, to me, they're very, deep thoughts or deep behavioral skills, competences to be a leader, to feel that belonging, to have these connections. How can you train people in organizations that have their tasks and projects and daily work? How do you teach them to better understand these concepts or even change their behavior on that?
Oh my goodness, you're right. It's like it is 9 a.m. It's a little early for me to be in such deep thoughts, Lucas, but you're you're giving me all of the, you're asking the pointed and important questions. Plato said, I can learn more about a person in an hour of play than I can, in a lifetime. And when we connect through play, we are able to allow ourselves an opening, a gateway into innovative and imaginative thought. Your question around, yes, but in the grind of daily work, in operations, in meetings, in Zoom hell, or whatever, where we exist, how do I employ that creativity? And in my mind, and for many of the clients who have benefited from this practice, it is not how can you, but how can you not? And I promise you, there are ways. There are ways that we do this. There are ways that we will be covering this in the workshop. There are ways that we will see in the social experiments that I have been lucky enough to conduct. We have moved the behavioral dial. We have changed thinking and a way of being by practicing creativity. There are ways that we can speak back to our editor, right? There is the practice of self-compassion. Christian Neff from UCLA, her research in self-compassion, that is a quick and powerful practice that leaders must employ if they are to take care of themselves. Leaders taking care of themselves is an important subject that we do not hear enough about. There is research that has come out of the University of Waterloo in my country that reveals that leaders and managers are reporting more mental health struggles than frontline workers for the first time. Leading tired is a real thing. Leading tired is a real thing. And the research tells us that when we are fatigued and stressed and anxious, then our cognitive capacity narrows. We cannot think straight. So we cannot be creative. We cannot be innovative. And it costs us. So in answer to your question, it is multifaceted. We need to have compassion. We need to be creative. We need to pause and employ silence. We need to do, interestingly, in this day and age of deep digital transformation and technological connection, what we need to do to lead powerfully are some really basic, important human things, to connect with ourselves and to connect with others. And luckily for me and you and Kay and the people here today, improv is a powerful way to do that. That is how we do that.
what if leaders learn that and, have better skills in listening and silence and so on? What would change, for example, if they attended workshops with you and understood it and changed the behavior? What would be the difference before and after that?
Anyone here who is a leader knows that this is not something theoretical, that when someone becomes a leader, they are welcomed into forced humility, right? Right. And thank you for laughing, because it is true. It is personal. It is difficult. It is worthy of the effort. There is self-reflection. It is transformative. And this will change you. As becoming a leader changes an individual. Think back to the time when, we rode a bike. Everyone here, think back to a time when you were a little boy or a little girl and you rode that bike. And there are things that allowed us to achieve that milestone. What was it? What did we need to have in order to do that? And when I ask this in workshops, I'm often given the answers like perseverance or tenacity or band-aids or, ability to keep at it or willingness. And that is all true. But what emerges for the child, like what emerges for the leader, what emerges for the child is the skill of balance. That is what human beings need in order to ride a bike. All of those other things are true in order to achieve that balance. But then something emerges that was not there before. And so you ask how this could change leadership. And I tell you, I believe that this is a social contagion, that when leaders embrace, as they are doing the world over in different sectors, servant leadership, inclusive leadership, the emotional intelligence, the adaptability intelligence, the AQ that's coming down hard, when they embed that into their organizational learning and themselves, they achieve something akin to balance from a childhood experience of riding a bike. It changes them. It is this type of leadership acts as a social contagion, and the change is like a cascading effect through the organization. Leaders lead and others follow. And ironically, leaders need to follow as well. But I'm sure you've covered that this past week.
Never enough.
Okay.
So the last question is, how do you combine research, arts, and practice? Because you referenced a lot of universities and studies. You draw attention to more like improvisational theater in some aspects, and then you talked about clients and business and leadership. How do you combine all of these different fields?
Oh, I love that. Because I get to work with a lot of engineers and physicists and technologists, I come in artsy and I love their discomfort, right? And of course, as everyone here knows, the wonderful thing about getting pushed out of your comfort zone is that as a result, we get a bigger comfort zone. In order to learn something new, Lucas, we need to learn differently. And so by weaving, like a beautiful Venn diagram, research and art and academics, we are able to weave a human experience using, quite literally, more parts of the brain. About 4 years ago, someone called me a pracademic, and it seems to have stuck. I love that, because while academic theory interests me intellectually, it does not change my human experience. Art changes the human experience. Before we started recording, before we let people in today, you and I were joking about what we wanted to do when we were kids, right? And when I grew up, I lived on a farm in rural Ontario. We lived in an old farmhouse, and in 1970, I used to sit down in front of this old black and white television set and watch my favorite show, and it was about gypsies. It was about gypsies, and this convoy of gypsies led this nomadic life, and they would travel from town to town to town, and they would tell stories, and they would do theater and share their art, and their stories always had a parable and a proverb and wisdom, and there was so much laughter and connection. And then they would pick up and go on to the next town. And I remember as a little girl, 6 years old, saying, best job ever. That's what I want to do when I grow up. How do I do that? And in a very real way, metaphorically and literally, that is what we get to do. We get to drop in, experience art, academics, that the very human experience of connection and co-creation, and then I'll pack up my caravan and and carry on, whether it's in a virtual world using my light board or whether we are, in person. One day I would love to do this in person, and I would love to come back to Vienna. I miss it.